It couldn't be. It was a knocking, faint yet insistent, coming from the deepest darkness of the dungeon. Ilara, a widow bowed by grief and misery, clutched her feverish grandson Theo, while the damp chill of the castle's underground penetrated her bones. Abandoned and with nowhere to go, that forgotten place was her last refuge. But the icy walls held more than echoes of a distant past. They pulsed with a dark mystery, a sound that called to her, that drew her into the unknown, promising to unveil something that would change her struggle for survival forever, or lead her to ruin. Ilara felt a shiver run down her spine, not just from the biting cold that embraced her, but from the strange rhythm of the knocking. Her heart, already so battered by life, beat erratically in her chest, a mix of ancestral fear and a stubborn spark of hope. Theo, small and fragile, trembled in her arms, his lips purplish and breath wheezing. The sight of her sick grandson was the only force that drove her beyond despair. She could not afford to ignore any sign, however strange, that might offer a thread of salvation. With a heavy sigh, Ilara clutched Theo closer, kissing the boy's feverish forehead. "Come, my angel," she whispered, more to herself than to him. Her eyes, accustomed to the gloom, tried to pierce the darkness that seemed to grow denser as the knocking grew clearer, more insistent. It was like a call, an invitation whispered by something very ancient, asleep in the bowels of that forgotten fortress. Rising with difficulty, every bone protesting the effort, Ilara rested Theo on her shoulder, the boy's small head lolling. She began to walk, slow, hesitant steps, dragging her feet across the damp, uneven floor. With every step, the sound seemed to intensify, guiding her through the shadows cast by massive columns and moss-covered stone walls. Her wrinkled fingers fumbled along the cold rock, seeking support, a direction, while her eyes scanned every crevice, every recess. The smell of mold and wet earth was almost suffocating, mixed with an ancient metallic odor that Ilara couldn't identify. Her mind, weary and overwhelmed, tried to rationalize the sound. Was it the wind, animals? But the knocking was so rhythmic, so deliberate. No, it wasn't nature. It was something more, something that seemed to have been intentionally hidden. A jolt of adrenaline, rare in her old age, stirred her body. What if it was a trap? What if it was something dangerous? The image of Theo, pale and weak, erased any hesitation. The danger of doing nothing was far greater. She reached a section of the wall that seemed smoother, less corroded by time. The knocking now resonated almost palpably, coming from a specific point. Ilara stopped, her heart pounding against her ribs. With her free hand, she began to slide her fingers over the cold stone, feeling every irregularity, every fissure. There was something different there, a texture that didn't align with the rest. Her fingers found a subtle, almost imperceptible indentation, covered by a layer of dust and cobwebs. With an effort, she pushed. The stone yielded with a low, drawn-out creak, revealing a narrow slit through which a gust of stagnant air escaped, bringing with it an even stronger smell of metal and guarded secrets. Ilara's eyes widened. It was a passage, hidden in plain sight, camouflaged in the darkness. A new wave of hope, fragile as a flickering flame, ignited in her chest. She looked at Theo, who seemed to be in a restless sleep, and then at the slit, which promised more than just a path. It promised an answer. With a last breath of courage, Ilara pushed the stone harder, opening the passage enough for her to peek inside, revealing an even deeper darkness, but now with the promise of something beyond. The darkness that opened before Ilara was an abyss of uncertainties, but the knocking, now closer and more vibrant, seemed to call her with a silent urgency. The smell of ancient metal and age-old dust intensified, enveloping her like a heavy cloak. She hesitated for an instant, the fear of an unknown danger tightening her chest. What if it was a collapse? What if something terrible was lurking? But the little Theo, nestled in her arms, coughed weakly, a sound that broke the spell of fear and rekindled the flame of determination in her heart. There was no more time to hesitate. Her grandson's life depended on that chance, however remote. With a monumental effort, Ilara pushed the heavy stone with her hunched shoulders, opening the slit a little wider. The sharp creak echoed through the dungeon, seeming to awaken dormant ghosts. The passage was narrow, barely allowing her to pass with Theo. She had to turn sideways, dragging her feet and body through the tight space, feeling the rough stone scrape against her clothes and wrinkled skin. The air inside was dense, heavy, and the dampness seemed to penetrate even deeper into her bones. Theo, fortunately, did not wake, his feverish sleep keeping him oblivious to the dangerous journey. With every inch she advanced, Ilara fumbled along the walls, seeking a light that didn't exist, a clarity that the environment refused to offer. The knocking, however, was her only compass, guiding her through that suffocating tunnel. They were no longer rhythmic as before, but rather a constant echo, as if something was pulsing in the heart of that secret chamber. Her eyes, already so accustomed to the dungeon's gloom, struggled to distinguish any shape, any contour. It was as if she were walking through a dark, palpable mist. The tunnel seemed to stretch for an eternity, each step a challenge, each breath an effort. Ilara felt the overwhelming fatigue, hunger gnawing at her stomach, and worry for Theo weighing on her soul. Her knees ached, her back protested, but the image of her grandson's pale face was a balm that propelled her forward. She couldn't fail, not after all she had been through. Hope, once a flickering flame, now burned with a stubborn intensity, fueled by the promise of something beyond misery. Suddenly, the passage began to widen. Ilara felt a larger space open before her, and the air, though still stagnant, seemed less oppressive. With a last push, she emerged from the tunnel, stumbling into a dark, cavernous chamber. The faint light coming from the slit in the dungeon wall barely reached this new environment, but it was enough to reveal a spectacle of dust and cobwebs, covering every surface. The smell of mold was almost overwhelming, mixed with a sweet, earthy aroma that she couldn't identify. Her eyes swept the area, trying to discern shapes in the gloom. There were piles of indistinct objects covered by rotting cloths, stacked wooden boxes, and in the center of the chamber, something that looked like a stone table. But what truly caught her attention was the object the knocking seemed to have guided her to. An ancient, ornate, wrought-iron strongbox, resting on a stone pedestal, covered by a thick layer of dust and cobwebs. It radiated an aura of mystery and secrets guarded for centuries. Ilara felt a shiver run through her body, not of fear, but of a deep and inexplicable intuition. This was not just an abandoned chamber, it was a sanctuary of a forgotten past, and the strongbox, a portal to the destiny that awaited her. Ilara fixed her eyes on the strongbox, a fortress of wrought iron adorned with lions and griffins. Beneath centuries of dust, the aura of mystery was palpable. Her exhausted heart pulsed with reverence and distrust. Was it real or a cruel mirage? Theo, asleep, let out a faint whimper, a reminder of the urgency. There was no time to hesitate. With faltering steps, Ilara advanced. The heavy air resisted her every movement. As she approached, she touched the cold, rough surface of the strongbox. The massive clasp showed no visible lock, rendering it impenetrable. "How to open it?" she whispered, her voice choked. Despair swallowed her. A sealed treasure, useless to Theo, was torture. With her free hand, she fumbled over the strongbox, searching for crevices or hidden mechanisms. Her fingers traced the carvings, the edges. Nothing. Frustration grew, hope threatened to extinguish. She closed her eyes, seeking strength, and pressed one of the carved griffin's eyes. Nothing. She tried another. Still nothing. The knocking that had guided her, where was it now? The silence of the chamber was almost absolute, broken only by Theo's faint breathing. Her eyes, more accustomed to the gloom, noticed a small protrusion on the stone wall behind the pedestal. Imperceptible, covered by moss and cobwebs, the shape seemed deliberate. With Theo still in her arms, Ilara stretched out her arm and touched the protrusion. It was a tiny lever camouflaged in the rock. Driven by urgency and the rhythmic knocking, Ilara pressed the lever. A soft, dry click echoed, and the sound of ancient gears began to turn inside the strongbox. It was a slow, drawn-out sound, like a giant awakening. Ilara held her breath, watching the massive clasp move, slowly turning. With a final click, the lid sprang open, revealing a dark and mysterious interior. A gust of ancient air escaped, bringing the scent of aged paper and metal. Ilara, with trembling hands, peered inside. Her eyes widened, barely believing. Inside, on a bed of faded velvet, lay jewels that gleamed in the gloom, pearls, rings with stones, gold and silver brooches. And beneath them, carefully rolled, were yellowed parchments tied with silk ribbons. The gleam was dazzling, and the documents promised greater secrets. Ilara felt a lump in her throat. This was not just wealth, it was the promise of a new life, of healing for Theo, of dignity for her lineage. An overwhelming wave of relief and gratitude washed over her, making her knees buckle. The journey, the fear, the despair, it had all been worth it. That strongbox held not just treasures, but the future she and Theo so desperately needed. The overwhelming wave of relief and gratitude that washed over Ilara made her knees buckle, but she refused to fall. That strongbox held not just treasures, but the future she and Theo so desperately needed. Her eyes, brimming with tears, fixed on the gleam of the jewels. Each gem a promise of warmth, food, and above all, health for her little grandson. She felt a warmth spread through her chest, momentarily pushing away the damp chill of the dungeon. It was a warmth of hope, something she hadn't felt in a very long time. With the hand not holding Theo, Ilara stretched out her trembling fingers to touch the jewels, the smooth texture of the pearls, the metallic cold of the gold and silver, the hardness of the precious stones. It wasn't a dream, it was real. A solitary tear traced a path down her wrinkled face, mixing with dust and sweat. She looked at Theo, who still slept restlessly, his face pale and breath uneven. "My angel," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Now we will have a chance." The priority was Theo. She needed light to examine the documents, but more importantly, she needed warmth and medicine for the boy. Carefully, Ilara took one of the simpler rings, with a small blue stone that seemed to glow even in the gloom. It was a symbolic gesture, a first step out of misery. She tucked it into the torn pocket of her apron, feeling the weight of hope. Next, her eyes turned to the yellowed parchments, tied with faded silk ribbons. Delicately, she picked up the scroll that was on top. The paper was rough and fragile to the touch, exuding a scent of time and secrets. Light was scarce, but Ilara brought the parchment closer to her face, straining her eyes. The letters, written in an ancient and elegant style, were difficult to decipher. But some words stood out, like beacons in the darkness. Lineage, inheritance, Valerius Castle. Ilara's heart leaped. Valerius. That was the name of the castle, the same name her late husband, a man of few words but great heart, had mentioned on rare occasions, always with a melancholic gleam in his eyes. He spoke of an ancient history, of a family that had once owned those lands, but had lost everything in times of war and intrigue. Ilara had never paid much attention, thinking them merely legends of a forgotten past. Now, those words resonated with a new and powerful truth. She unrolled the parchment a little further, her fingers trembling. There, on an almost faded wax seal, was her own family's crest, which she recognized from an old tapestry kept by her mother. A rampant lion, the same lion that adorned the strongbox. A wave of shock and recognition washed over her. It wasn't just wealth, it was her history, her identity, her lineage that lay there, sealed by time. The castle, which she had thought to be her temporary and humiliating refuge, was in fact her rightful home. The revelation was overwhelming, the misery, the humiliation, the abandonment. Everything transformed into a purpose. Her eyes filled with fierce determination. She was no longer a helpless widow, but the guardian of an inheritance, the protector of a legacy. Theo, in her arms, was not just her sick grandson, but the future of a noble lineage. That strongbox, hidden for centuries, not only saved her from hunger and cold, but restored her dignity and that of her family. Ilara clutched Theo closer, feeling the strength of her ancestors flow through her veins. The path ahead would be long and uncertain, but now she had the truth, the wealth, and above all, the hope to fight. Ilara's fingers still trembled as she touched the parchment, the crest of her rampant lion leaping from the cracked wax. The truth was a heavy burden, but also an invisible crown. The ruins, once a dungeon of despair, were now the home of her ancestors, a legacy that she, the forgotten widow, had a duty to reclaim. Her eyes, once tear-filled with sadness, now shone with fierce determination. She clutched Theo closer, feeling his warm breath. "No more, my love," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "No more will we suffer hunger or cold. We will fight." Euphoria gave way to urgent clarity. The wealth was undeniable, but the priority was Theo's fragile life. She couldn't carry everything. Carefully, Ilara chose a small velvet pouch from the strongbox. Into it, she placed a few discreet rings and a gold brooch, easy to exchange for provisions. The weight in her hand was that of a future, medicine, a doctor, warm bread. She tucked the pouch into the torn pocket of her apron, feeling the precious bulk against her skin. The parchments were the key. Delicately, she rolled up the main document with the seal and crest, tucking it under her arm close to Theo. The others would have to wait. She couldn't risk damaging them, for they were irrefutable proof of her truth. The chamber, once a sanctuary of hope, now seemed a final obstacle between her and her grandson's salvation. Returning through the narrow tunnel would be difficult with her new burden and responsibility. Every movement was calculated, every step a prayer. Ilara had to turn sideways, her shoulders hunched, protecting Theo and the parchment. The dense air and the smell of mold seemed to suffocate her, but the image of a recovered Theo, running under the sun, was her beacon. She felt the rough stone, the dampness penetrating, but the physical pain was lesser compared to the soul's pain she had just transcended. Finally, with an exhausted sigh, Ilara emerged from the tunnel, back into the main dungeon. The darkness there seemed less threatening, the cold not so unbearable, for hope warmed her chest. She looked at the heavy stone that concealed the passage, and with a final effort pushed it back, sealing the secret. No one needed to know, not yet. The time to reveal the truth would come, but not now. The path out of the underground would be long and arduous. The steep and slippery stairs terrified her weary knees, but Ilara was no longer the same woman who had descended there, bowed by hopelessness. She was the guardian of a lineage, the bearer of an ancestral truth, the matriarch of a future. With a last kiss on Theo's feverish forehead, she began to ascend, one step at a time, her heart pounding with fear and unwavering courage. Each step was a victory, a step towards the light, justice, and the promise of a new dawn. The castle, once a tomb of dreams, was now a cradle of hope and redemption, awaiting its lady. Ilara's fingers still trembled as she touched the parchment, the crest of her rampant lion leaping from the cracked wax. The truth was a heavy burden, but also an invisible crown. The ruins, once a dungeon of despair, were now the home of her ancestors, a legacy that she, the forgotten widow, had a duty to reclaim. Her eyes, once tear-filled with sadness, now shone with fierce determination. She clutched Theo closer, feeling his warm breath. "No more, my love," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "No more will we suffer hunger or cold. We will fight." The ascent up the steep and slippery stairs was a torment. Each step was a battle against the fatigue that weighed on her bones and the dampness that made the stone treacherous. Ilara leaned against the wall with her free hand, feeling the cold roughness beneath her wrinkled fingers, while Theo, still asleep, was a precious and fragile weight in her arms. The parchment, firmly tucked under her arm, seemed to burn with the promise of a future. She breathed with difficulty, the thin, mouldy air of the underground scratching her throat, but the image of her recovered grandson, smiling and playing, was the force that propelled her onward. Her knees ached, her back protested with every movement, but the new hope was a balm for all her pains. Finally, after what seemed an eternity, Ilara felt a fresh breeze, and the scent of earth and vegetation invade her nostrils. The light, though still faint through the gloom of the ruins, was a gift to her weary eyes. She emerged from the underground into a courtyard overgrown with weeds and fallen stones, where daylight struggled to penetrate through the cracks in the crumbling walls. The silence was profound, broken only by the rustling of the wind among the stones and the distant song of a bird. Ilara took a deep breath, feeling the pure air fill her lungs and a wave of relief sweep over her body. She had made it. She was out. With Theo nestled against her chest, Ilara took a hesitant step into the courtyard, her eyes sweeping the surroundings. The ruins were majestic, even in their decay, with broken arches and partially crumbled towers that rose against the grey sky. She felt her family's history in every stone, in every crack. A sense of belonging, of purpose, filled her heart. She was no longer a fugitive, but an heir. It was then that the sound of footsteps, slow and measured, broke the stillness of the courtyard. Ilara froze, her heart leaping in her chest. She was not alone. She turned abruptly, shielding Theo with her body, and her eyes met a figure emerging from behind a broken column. It was an elderly man, with a well-kept white beard and simple yet clean robes that denoted a certain dignity. His eyes, shrewd and deep, fixed on Ilara with an expression of surprise and perhaps disapproval. It was Master Alarico, the most respected elder of the neighboring village, known for his wisdom and his sharp memory of the region's history. He carried a wooden staff and seemed to be inspecting the ruins, perhaps searching for herbs or simply on one of his morning walks. Upon seeing Ilara emerge from the underground with a sick grandson in her arms and a suspicious parchment under her arm, Alarico's face twisted into a grimace of astonishment and then into an expression of severity. "Ilara, what are you doing here, my dear? And with the child?" Alarico's voice was grave, laden with an authority that made Ilara shrink slightly. The parchment under her arm seemed to weigh even heavier, and the pouch of jewels in her pocket, once a promise of salvation, now seemed like proof of guilt. Alarico's gaze swept over Theo, then the parchment, and finally fixed on Ilara's eyes, penetrating and inquisitive. Ilara felt her blood run cold. This was the turning point she hadn't expected. She had imagined facing hunger, cold, disease, but not the judgment of her own people, personified by Alarico. How would she explain what she had found? How would she convince someone so respected, and perhaps so skeptical, of her new truth? The fear of being misunderstood, of being seen as a thief or a madwoman, tightened her chest. The hope that had warmed her moments before now mingled with a paralyzing anxiety. She clutched Theo tighter, feeling the boy's faint warmth. Her grandson's life depended on her next words, on how she would navigate that unexpected and dangerous encounter. The silence between the two was heavy, laden with centuries of history and an uncertain future. Ilara swallowed hard, searching for the right words, knowing that the justice of her lineage and Theo's salvation were at stake. Ilara swallowed hard, searching for the right words, knowing that the justice of her lineage and Theo's salvation were at stake. Master Alarico's penetrating gaze was like a sharp beam of light, dissecting her weary soul. Ilara's mouth was dry, and she felt a tremor run through her aged legs. "Master Alarico," she began, her voice hoarse and low, I had nowhere to go. Theo is very sick and the cold outside. The ruins were the only place we could shelter." She clutched her grandson against her chest, an instinctive gesture of protection. Alarico's eyes softened for an instant upon seeing the pale child, but soon returned to their severe expression. "Shelter? In these cursed ruins, Ilara. You know well that this place is avoided by everyone. And what is that you carry with you?" Alarico pointed to the parchment and to the bulk in Ilara's pocket, his voice laden with distrust. "Don't tell me you've come to plunder what remains of these ancient stones." The accusation hit Ilara like a blow. She felt a flush rise to her wrinkled face. "No, master. I would never do such a thing. I found it. Down below, in a place no one knew existed." She tried to explain, but the words seemed to tangle on her tongue. Alarico frowned, incredulity evident. "Found it? And what did you find, Ilara? A treasure? Is that it? And why do you hide it?" The elder took a step forward, his staff tapping softly on the stone floor. Ilara recoiled slightly, her heart beating erratically. "It's not a treasure, master. Well, it is. But not in the way you think. They are jewels, yes, but also documents. Documents that prove the truth about this place. About my family." She unfolded the parchment with a trembling hand, revealing the rampant lion crest and the ancient seal. Alarico's eyes widened slightly upon seeing the crest, a shadow of recognition passing over his face. He approached, his expression shifting from distrust to cautious curiosity. "The Valerius crest. But that's impossible. The Valerius lineage died out centuries ago. Their lands were lost in the Great War." "It didn't die out, master," Ilara insisted, her voice gaining a thread of strength. "My husband, my late son's father, he was a Valerius, and Theo. Theo is the last of the lineage. These documents prove that this castle, these ruins, belong to us by right." The words came out in a rush, laden with deep emotion. She extended the parchment to Alarico, who took it carefully, his wrinkled fingers tracing the yellowed paper and the wax seal. The elder began to read the ancient letters, his lips moving silently, while Ilara watched, her body tense, her breath held. Time seemed to stop. The wind whispered among the stones, and the distant song of a bird was the only sound that broke the heavy silence. Ilara felt the weight of Alarico's gaze, the gravity of the moment. Theo's life, her family's honor, everything depended on that man, on his interpretation of those ancient words. She saw Alarico's expression change, from skepticism to surprise, and then to deep reflection. The elder raised his eyes from the parchment, fixing them on Ilara with renewed intensity. "If this is true, Ilara," Alarico said, his voice now softer, almost a whisper, "if this is indeed true, then the history we know is incomplete. And you, my dear, are the guardian of a secret that can change everything." There was still doubt in Alarico's eyes, but also a glimpse of something more. Respect, perhaps, and the promise of a careful listening. The parchment was powerful proof, but Ilara's story was fantastic. She needed more than words. She needed faith. Ilara felt a tear escape. It's the truth, Master, I swear. And Theo, he needs help. The jewels. They can give us the means to save him. She slightly opened her apron, showing the velvet pouch with the discreet gleam of the jewels. Alarico looked at the pouch, then at Theo, and a heavy sigh escaped his lips. Come with me, Ilara. We cannot stay here. The village needs to know about this, and the boy needs care. Alarico's voice was now one of compassion, authority mingling with concern. Ilara felt an overwhelming relief. The judgment had not come, at least not in the cruelest way. The door to hope had opened a little wider. She nodded, her eyes brimming with gratitude. Thank you, Master Alarico. Thank you. She clutched Theo once more, feeling her grandson's faint warmth. The path to justice and healing would be long, but now she was not alone. Master Alarico, parchment in hand, turned and began to walk slowly out of the ruins, his staff tapping rhythmically on the ground. Ilara followed him, each step a mix of exhaustion and a new, powerful determination. The sun, which had seemed indifferent before, now cast a faint glow over the ruins, like a promise that light, finally, was returning to Ilara's and Theo's lives. Ilara followed Master Alarico, the weight of Theo in her arms and the parchment under the other, a burden that was both heavy and light, full of promises. The uneven path leading to the village was a constant challenge for her aged knees, but physical exhaustion was overcome by the urgency burning in her chest. Each step, however small, was driven by the image of a recovered Theo running under the sun. The smell of damp earth and pine trees replaced the mold of the underground, and the fresh air, though still cold, seemed to purify her soul, washing away the hopelessness of so many days. Alarico walked ahead, his staff marking the rhythm on the ground, his head bowed in deep reflection. Ilara watched his hunched back, feeling a complex mix of relief and apprehension. The elder had accepted the story, or at least considered it worthy of investigation, but how would the rest of the village react to such a revelation, to such a twist of fate? As they approached the first houses, the hum of daily life began to reach them. The smell of wood smoke and fresh bread wafted through the air, a painful contrast to the hunger Ilara and Theo had endured. Small groups of villagers, busy with their morning tasks, began to notice the unusual presence of the two. Whispers spread like wildfire. Curious glances, some worried, others openly distrustful, followed Ilara. She felt the heat of judgment on their faces, the shadow of years of marginalization returning to haunt her. She clutched Theo tighter, feeling her grandson's fragile body. The fever seemed to have subsided a little, but his breathing was still shallow. Master Alarico, sensing the tension, stopped in the center of the small village square where a stone fountain gushed crystal-clear water. He raised the parchment, showing it to everyone. "People of Eldoria," his voice resonated, surprisingly strong for his age. "We have Ilara here, and she brings with her a truth that can change everything we know about these lands and about her own family." The villagers approached, curiosity overcoming distrust. Alarico, with slow and deliberate gestures, unrolled the parchment. Pointing to the crest and the ancient letters, he began to narrate the story, not Ilara's, but that of the Valerius, the forgotten lineage that, according to the documents, was the rightful owner of the ruins. As Alarico spoke, the villagers' eyes turned to Ilara, then to Theo. The sight of the pale, sick boy in his grandmother's arms seemed to touch the hardest hearts. A younger woman, with a headscarf and kind eyes, stepped forward. "The boy is sick, Master Alarico. He needs help now, not ancient stories." Her voice was soft but firm, and others nodded in agreement. Ilara felt a pang of hope. Compassion, after all, had not vanished from that world. Alarico looked at Ilara, a glimmer of understanding in his eyes. "She is right. Justice can wait a little, but life cannot. Ilara, the jewels you found, They can be Theo's salvation. He gestured to the woman. Lena, please, prepare a warm place in your house. And call healer Mara. The boy needs her care. Lena nodded immediately, her face softening with compassion. She approached Ilara, extending her hands. Come, Ilara, let me help with little Theo. Ilara hesitated for an instant. The distrust rooted in years of abandonment, battling against the wave of altruism. But Lena's kind gaze and the urgency in Alarico's voice convinced her. She handed Theo into the young woman's arms, a gesture of faith and vulnerability. Theo's body heat was faint, but the hope Lena conveyed was strong. As Lena carried Theo to her house, Ilara felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The jewels in her pocket, once a secret treasure, were now a means to a nobler end. The community, which she had feared, was uniting to help. Alarico placed a hand on Ilara's shoulder, a gesture that conveyed more than words. Now, my dear, let's talk. There is much to be done and the village needs to understand. But first, the boy. Ilara nodded, her voice choked with gratitude. Alarico's words were a balm. The path to the justice of her lineage and Theo's recovery would still be long, but the loneliness had been broken. Human connection, so absent in her life, began to weave a new tapestry of hope and support. The morning sun, now shining brighter, seemed to bless the village, promising that even in the ruins of life, compassion could flourish. Ilara watched Lena walk away with Theo, the small body nestled in her arms like a fragile treasure. The sight of the young woman, with her evident compassion, sent a wave of warmth through Ilara's chest, an almost forgotten feeling that not all humanity had abandoned her. She felt her eyes well up with tears, but blinked them away quickly, not wanting to appear weak before the curious gazes of the villagers. The morning sun, now shining brighter, seemed to bless the village, promising that, even in the ruins of life, compassion could flourish. Master Alarico squeezed Ilara's shoulder, a gesture that conveyed more than words. Come, my dear, sit here by the fountain. We need everyone to hear your story and to understand what this parchment truly means. He led Ilara to a worn stone bench where the murmur of gushing water seemed to calm the tension in the air. The villagers gathered in a respectful semicircle, their faces a mix of expectation and apprehension. Ilara felt the weight of the parchment in her hands, the rampant lion crest seeming to vibrate with the urgency of her truth. She took a deep breath, seeking the strength she had found in the depths of the ruins. I know it's hard to believe, she began, her voice still a little hoarse, but firm. But what I found was not by chance. It was destiny, the voice of my ancestors guiding me. She narrated the story from the abandonment, Theo's illness, the desperate refuge in the ruins, the mysterious knocking, the secret passage, and finally the hidden chamber. She described the strongbox, the jewels, and the revelation of the documents. As Ilara spoke, Alarico, with the parchment open, pointed to the details, the signatures, the seals. This is the Valerius crest, Alarico explained to the villagers, his voice grave and authoritative. A lineage we thought extinct, but which, according to these documents, is the rightful owner of these lands and the ancient castle. The ruins we see today were one day the home of their ancestors. The villagers whispered, their eyes alternating between the parchment, Alarico, and Ilara. Some shook their heads in disbelief, others in admiration. It was then that healer Mara arrived, a woman with grey hair and piercing eyes, carrying a leather bag full of herbs. Lena had found her quickly. Mara wasted no time with formalities. "Where is the boy?" she asked, her voice practical and direct. Lena reappeared, leading Mara into her house. Ilara felt a tightening in her heart, but her trust in Lena and Mara was a balm. Alarico continued to speak, explaining the complexity of the documents. the historical injustice that had deprived the Valerius family of their lands. "Ilara is not a thief," Alarico declared, his voice echoing through the square. "She is an heir, and Theo, little Theo, is the last link in a chain we thought broken. Justice, my friends, is a powerful force, and it manifests in mysterious ways." Gradually, the distrust on the villagers' faces began to give way to cautious admiration, then to growing empathy. Ilara's story of her struggle and her discovery touched their hearts. A robust man, the village blacksmith, stepped forward. "If what you say is true, Master Alarico, and if Ilara is truly a Valerius, then she has the right to reclaim what is hers. And the boy. The boy needs our help." Others nodded, their voices joining in a chorus of support. Ilara felt a lump in her throat. This was the recognition she had never dreamed of having. The loneliness that had accompanied her for so long began to dissipate, replaced by a sense of belonging. She looked at Alarico, her eyes brimming with gratitude. The elder smiled, a warm smile that reached his shrewd eyes. Suddenly, Lena reappeared at her doorstep, her face pale. "Master Alarico, Ilara," she called, her voice low but urgent. "Healer Mara says Theo's fever is very high. We need more than herbs. We need something that can only be found in the city, and quickly." The news hit Ilara like a lightning bolt, bringing back the urgency of her situation. The jewels in her pocket, the treasure that was supposed to guarantee healing, now seemed insufficient given the gravity of Lena's words. The newfound hope mingled with renewed fear. The battle for Theo's life was far from over. The news hit Ilara like a lightning bolt, bringing back the urgency of her situation. The jewels in her pocket, the treasure that was supposed to guarantee healing, now seemed insufficient given the gravity of Lena's words. The newfound hope mingled with renewed fear, a knot tightening in her stomach. The battle for Theo's life was far from over. She felt the ground beneath her feet waver, and her eyes sought Master Alarico's, a silent plea for help. The elder, sensing the despair on Ilara's face and the apprehension among the villagers, raised a hand. "Silence, people of Eldoria. Little Theo's life is at stake. Lena, Healer Mara, what exactly is needed, and how quickly?" His voice, though firm, revealed the gravity of the moment. Lena, with tear-filled eyes, explained, "The fever is malignant, Master. Mara says we need a rare herb, the moonleaf, and a special balm. Both are only found in the markets of the great city, and the journey takes a full day, perhaps more, to go and return." A murmur of concern ran through the crowd. The great city was distant, and the road, though not dangerous, required time and resources. Ilara felt a chill run down her spine. The jewels. They could pay, but who would go? And who would trust a woman like her to deliver something so valuable? Master Alarico turned to Ilara, his eyes fixed on the velvet pouch she still held. "Ilara, the jewels you found. They are the key. We need someone trustworthy to go to the city, sell a part of them, and bring back the remedies." Ilara nodded, her voice choked. "Yes, Master. I give them willingly." But who? She looked at the faces around her, searching for a sign, a promise. It was then that a robust young man, with broad shoulders and a determined gaze, stepped forward. It was Kale, the blacksmith's son, known for his honesty and speed. "I will go, Master Alarico. I know the roads to the great city. I can leave at dawn and return as quickly as possible." Ilara felt a wave of gratitude so intense it almost knocked her over. Kyle, someone she barely knew, was offering to risk himself for Theo. The young man's altruism was a balm for her wounded soul. Alarico nodded with a smile. "Kyle, your courage is commendable. Ilara, give him the jewels. Choose the most modest one so as not to arouse suspicion. And Kyle, take this letter. It attests to the authenticity of your mission and the payment." The elder hastened to grab a piece of parchment and a quill, writing quickly. Ilara, with trembling hands, opened the pouch and took out some smaller jewels, yet still of great value, handing them to Kyle. The young man put them away with reverence. "I will return as quickly as I can, Ilara, for the boy." The community rallied. A woman offered a faster horse for Kyle. Another villager promised food for the journey. The square, once a stage for judgment, was now a hub of solidarity. Ilara watched, her heart heavy, but also filled with a new and powerful hope. Human connection, which she thought she had lost forever, was manifesting in a way she had never imagined. The battle for Theo's life continued, but now Ilara was no longer alone. Ilara remained in the square, her heart heavy, but strangely warmed by the wave of solidarity that surrounded her. Kyle had departed, taking with him not only the jewels, but everyone's hope. The sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, and each passing minute dragged with it a piece of the little patience Ilara still possessed. She sat down again on the stone bench, her eyes fixed on the road leading out of the village, as if she could hasten the young man's return. Lena and healer Mara were inside the house, the flickering light of a lamp indicating their presence. From time to time, Lena appeared at the door, her face weary, but her eyes conveying a silent determination. "The fever is still high, Ilara," she whispered, her voice choked with worry. "Mara is doing what she can, but he is so weak." Ilara merely nodded, unable to utter a word, the lump in her throat tightening with each new piece of information. She felt useless, a spectator in the fight for her grandson's life. The villagers, though returning to their homes for meals, did not forget Ilara. Women brought her warm broths and fresh bread, insisting that she eat. Men sat beside her, offering words of comfort, sharing stories of overcoming adversity. Ilara's loneliness, which for so long had been her only companion, was being gently undone by the web of human connection. She felt the strength of that community, a strength she had never known existed, or that could be directed towards her. Night fell, dark and cold, and the full moon, the very moonleaf Theo needed, hung high in the sky, mocking in its unattainable beauty. Ilara couldn't sleep. Every shadow, every whisper of the wind seemed like a sign of Kale's return, but it was always an illusion. She prayed, a silent and desperate prayer, asking the heavens to guide the young man and save her Theo. Her wrinkled fingers clutched the empty pouch where she had once kept the jewels, feeling the void, but also the hope they represented. At dawn, the village awoke to a heavy silence. The hope of the previous night began to fade with the grey light of the new day. Lena emerged from the house, her eyes red and swollen. "Ilara," she called, her voice almost a lament. "The fever, it worsened. Mara says he is fighting, but he is fading. We need Kyle." Lena's words were like daggers in Ilara's heart. She stood up, swaying, the world spinning around her. Master Alarico, who had spent the night in vigil with Ilara, placed a hand on her shoulder. "Have faith, my dear. Kyle is fast and determined. He will come." But the elder's voice carried a note of uncertainty that Ilara could not ignore. She walked to Lena's doorstep, peering inside. Theo was pale, his breathing short and ragged, his small body trembling under the blankets. Mara, her face contorted with worry, held the boy's hand. Ilara felt an overwhelming despair. Was this the end? After everything, after finding hope, would it be snatched from her? She closed her eyes, a solitary tear tracing a path down her marked face. She couldn't lose Theo. She couldn't. Suddenly, a distant sound, almost inaudible, broke the morning silence. A horse's gallop, far off but unmistakable. Ilara opened her eyes, her heart pounding. Was it Kyle, or was it just another illusion of her exhausted mind? The villagers, who had also heard, began to gather in the square, their gazes fixed on the road. The sound drew closer, becoming clearer, stronger, the rhythmic gallop of a horse at full speed. A figure appeared on the horizon, small at first, but growing rapidly. It was Kyle, mounted on the fastest horse in the village, his face sweaty and exhausted, but his eyes burning with fierce determination. In his hand, he held a small package. Hope, almost extinguished moments before, erupted in the square like a sudden sun. Ilara felt a cry caught in her throat, a mix of relief and pure agony. The climax had arrived, but Theo's life still hung by a thread. The climax had arrived, but Theo's life still hung by a thread. Kyle, with a final effort, pulled the horse's reins, and it stopped abruptly in the center of the square, panting and covered in sweat. The young man leaped from the saddle before the animal had even fully stopped, his feet barely touching the ground before he ran towards Lena's house. The small package was tightly clutched in his hand. "The Moonleaf! The balm!" Kyle gasped, extending the package to Gila Mara, who was already at the door, her eyes wide with hope and apprehension. Mara took the package with trembling hands, her experienced fingers already opening it as she turned and disappeared into the house, the door softly closing behind her. Ilara ran to Kyle, her aged knees protesting, but adrenaline propelled her. She grabbed the young man's shoulders, tears streaming freely down her face. "Kyle, my boy, you did it. You saved him." Her voice was a mix of sobs and gratitude, and she could barely form the words. Kyle, exhausted, merely nodded, a faint smile appearing on his cracked lips. "For the boy, Ilara. Always for the boy." The villagers crowded together, tense silence hanging in the air as everyone waited. No one dared to speak, not even whisper. Their gazes were fixed on Lena's doorstep, as if they could see through the walls what was happening inside. Time seemed to drag, each second an eternity, as Theo's life was contended between illness and hope. Ilara, with her hands clasped in prayer, felt every beat of her heart reverberate in her ears. Master Alarico approached, placing a comforting hand on Ilara's back. "Have faith, my dear. Gila Mara is the best, and the Moonleaf is a powerful remedy." His words were a balm, but worry was still etched on his face. Minutes stretched into an agonizing eternity. Then the door opened again. Lena appeared, her face still pale, but a faint, weary smile lit up her eyes. "The fever. It has broken. Gila Mara says he is sleeping now. His breathing is calmer." A collective sigh of relief swept through the square. Ilara felt her legs weaken and had to lean on Kale to keep from falling. The tears that were once of despair now were of pure and overwhelming gratitude. She couldn't believe it. Theo was saved. Gila Mara emerged from the house, her serious demeanor softened by a satisfied weariness. "He is still weak, Ilara, and will need much care and good nourishment to fully recover, but the worst is over. The Moonleaf and the balm acted in time." She looked at Kyle with admiration. "You were fast, my young man. You saved a life." Kyle blushed, but his gaze was fixed on Ilara, who now walked slowly towards the house door, her eyes brimming with tears. She peered inside and saw Theo, small and fragile, sleeping deeply. Color was returning to his face, and his breathing was soft and regular. A smile, the first true smile in a long time, bloomed on Ilara's lips. Master Alarico raised the parchment, his voice resonating with new authority. "People of Eldoria, today we witness not only Kale's courage, but the strength of compassion and unity. Ilara and Theo are part of our community now. The justice of the Valerius lineage will be restored, and the castle, which was once their home, will again be a symbol of hope. But above all, Theo's life was saved by the kindness of all of you." The villagers applauded, their voices joining in a chorus of support. Ilara felt the warmth of acceptance, her loneliness completely dissolving. She was no longer an outcast, an abandoned woman. She was Ilara Valerius, Theo's grandmother, and she had a community that supported her. The battle for Theo's life had been won, and with it, a new era of dignity and belonging had begun for Ilara. Ilara felt the weight of the world dissipate, replaced by a lightness she hadn't known in a long time. She knelt beside Theo's bed, watching his small chest rise and fall in a gentle rhythm. The rosy color returned to her grandson's pale cheeks, and a small smile played on his lips. It was the image of life, of recovery, of the future. Lena, with a loving gaze, placed her hand on Ilara's shoulder. "He will be fine, my dear. He is a strong boy." Ilara nodded, tears of gratitude blurring her vision. She took Theo's small hand, feeling the warmth of the life she had almost lost. In the following days, Eldoria transformed into a hive of activity. The news of Ilara's inheritance and Theo's recovery spread, uniting the community. Master Alarico, with wisdom, led the validation of the documents. He traveled to the great city, presenting the proofs of the Valerius lineage to the authorities, who, after analysis, confirmed their legitimacy. Justice, once a distant mirage, finally manifested itself. Meanwhile, the villagers, with unwavering altruism, began to work on the castle. It was not just restoring a property, but honoring history and creating a home for Ilara and Theo. Kyle, the courageous young man, organized teams to clear debris, reinforce walls, and repair the roof. Women like Lena brought food and blankets, and Mara monitored Theo's health, ensuring his full recovery. Ilara, though weak, actively participated, supervising and sharing memories of her ancestors. She walked through the once gloomy corridors, now filled with light and hope, imagining life there. The underground, her former refuge, would be transformed into a cellar or storage, a reminder of where it all began, but no longer a home of misery. The jewels, sold with Alarico's help, provided the necessary funds for the castle's restoration and to ensure Ilara's and Theo's well-being. But the true treasure was not the precious stones, but the human connection they had forged. Ilara's loneliness had been banished forever. She found a family in Theo and a community in Eldoria. Months passed. The castle, once a forgotten ruin, rose again, majestic and proud. Its towers, once crumbled, pointed to the sky, and the windows, once empty, now shone with the light of new lives. Theo, fully recovered, ran through the courtyards, his laughter echoing through the ancient walls, filling them with the joy of childhood. Ilara watched him, her heart overflowing with a happiness she never thought possible. She sat on a stone bench in the main courtyard, the sun warming her wrinkled face. Beside her, Master Alarico read a book, and Lena wove a colorful blanket. Kyle, now a loyal friend, frequently visited her, sharing stories from the village. Ilara's life, which began in despair and loneliness, had been rewritten by courage, discovery, and above all, compassion. Valerius Castle was not just a restored home. It was a monument to the resilience of the human spirit, a testament that, even in the depths of darkness, the light of hope and human connection can shine brightest, transforming misery into a legacy of redemption and a promising future for generations. Justice had been served, the family reunited, and love had triumphed over adversity. Justice had been served, the family reunited, and love had triumphed over adversity. Now, Valerius Castle was not just a restored home, but a beacon of hope that radiated comforting warmth throughout Eldoria. Ilara, sitting on the stone bench that had become her favorite spot in the main courtyard, watched Theo. The boy, now robust and full of life, ran after a butterfly, his crystalline laughter echoing through the ancient walls, filling every corner with a melody of pure joy. Ilara's heart, once so heavy and solitary, now overflowed with a lightness and gratitude she never imagined possible. Her eyes, once clouded by sadness and pain, now shone with a deep serenity. She recalled the dark days in the damp underground, the biting cold, the hunger, the despair of watching Theo waste away. Those memories, though painful, now served as a constant reminder of the journey they had undertaken and the strength they had found. With every laugh from Theo, with every ray of sun that kissed the castle stones, Ilara felt the confirmation that life, however cruel it seemed, always held the promise of a new dawn. She ran her wrinkled fingers over the fabric of her simple tunic, a gesture that once denoted her poverty, but which was now a symbol of her restored dignity. Theo, with his golden hair blowing in the wind, was the personification of hope. He was not just Ilara's grandson, he was the future of the Valerius lineage, a living link to a glorious past and a bright future. The boy, who had almost succumbed to illness, now helped Lena tend the small gardens in the inner courtyard and listened with fascination to Master Alarico's stories about the ancient kings and queens who had inhabited those lands. His curiosity was insatiable, and his eyes, once dull with fever, now reflected the vivacity of a healthy and loved child. The community of Eldoria flourished alongside the castle. The doors of Valerius were always open. The main courtyard, once covered in rubble, was now a gathering place where villagers met for festivities, to exchange news, or simply to enjoy each other's company. Kale, the young blacksmith, had become an inseparable friend of Ilara and frequently visited her, sharing the progress of his work and his dreams for the village. Healer Mara, with her wisdom, had established a small medicinal herb post in one of the restored towers, offering her knowledge to all who needed it. The solidarity that had saved Theo took root, transforming the village into a true extended family. The castle, with its stone walls now clean and its imposing towers, was not just Ilara's and Theo's residence. It had become the pulsating heart of Eldoria, a tangible symbol that justice, perseverance, and human connection could overcome any adversity. Master Alarico, with his calm and authoritative voice, often reminded everyone that the story of the Valerius was the story of all of them. Proof that even when all seemed lost, hope could be found in the most unexpected places, and that true wealth resided in the bonds that united people. Ilara closed her eyes for an instant, feeling the warmth of the sun on her face. She had found more than jewels and inheritance. She had found a purpose, a family, and a home. The underground, that place of despair, was now just a distant memory, a dark chapter that had led to the light. She opened her eyes and saw Theo running towards her, his arms open, a wide smile on his face. Ilara leaned down, embracing her grandson with all the strength and tenderness of her being. That embrace was her redemption, her promise of a future. Life, after all, was a precious gift, and she was ready to live it fully, alongside her beloved Theo and her new family in Eldoria.